I want to read Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 out loud because I feel like much of the knowledge we have of Genesis 1 and 2 doesn't actually come from the Bible, but rather comes from other sources. Your grandparents, your Sunday school teacher, um, other books all influence how we look at the creation of the earth and Adam and Eve. Much of this knowledge comes from a book called Paradise Lost in 1657 or 67, I believe. 1667 was the publication date of a book called Paradise Lost by John Milton. John Milton was a 17th century English poet, and he felt like these two chapters in the Bible did not dedicate enough attention to the creators of all life. So he set out to expand upon this idea, and this is where a lot of our ideas about Genesis come from. This was the second best-selling book of all time. And it's trickled in to our ideas of how Genesis actually happened. But we really need to look at what the text says. If we're basing our faith and a literal belief on a text, we don't need to muddy that up, right, with other books. So let's look at the text and look at how it's created. One thing I want to point out is there are two definite creations of women. In chapter 1 there is one, and in chapter 2 there is another. This is explained by what we call a doublet. A doublet is taking two versions of the same story and putting them together in one book. Scholars believe that is what happened with Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. The question is what kinds of problems can this bring about? And we're going to talk about that after we read the Bible. I will be stopping intermittently to discuss things, but I will try and pick up by the verse number. Okay, so in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Okay, I want to stop right here because we're going to see this again created over in verse 14. So I want to suggest that this first creation is dividing darkness from light, like most myths do. So the darkness or the abyss is, or chaos is dark. So in order to create anything, we need light. Now, in verse 5, we see that this was called the evening and the morning, and they were the first day. But again, we don't see the day created until verse 14. So let's move on. At verse 6, and God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so." Okay, so here we see God creating the sky and separating it from the waters. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called the seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its own kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. Okay, let's look at this plant creation because it's kind of confusing. What God is saying is that everything that he's created has a seed, so that these seeds can be replanted. Okay, these seeds can yield fruit for a long time. They can bear grass and herbs for a long time because they have a seed. That's an important distinction. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them bear signs and seasons for days and years. So what he's saying in verse 14 is there is no distinction between between the days, the seasons, and the years until day 4. Okay, so we kind of have to look at the verses over here in verse 3 and 4 as something that happens very similarly in other mythology. Okay, we see the light arise from the dark, the good and the evil. The light is separated from the dark, and that begins the creation. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean day or night. This could mean periods, right? We just can process it better if we put that everything was created in a day. As humans, we process things better if we understand the time period in which they were created in. Okay, so let's pick up at verse 15. And let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made stars also. And God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So here you see an echoing of dividing that light from the darkness, which we see happening in verse 3. Okay, so that was the 4th day. So at verse 20, we get the beginning of the 5th day. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created the great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, and after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth. So there's something interesting about this 5th day here. God brings forth 2 very important types of animals. Animals of the water, great sea creatures is how they're explained in other versions of the Bible, and winged fowl or birds of every kind. Okay, so this seems like 2 very specific things being created at a very specific time point. And if we look at the dinosaurs and what we know about dinosaurs, these creatures were reptilians, sea creatures, and birds. Recent discoveries have shown that T-Rex and some of the other dinosaurs were known to be covered in feathers. They may not have been winged, but they looked a lot like a bird. And these great sea creatures, animals that live in the water, like the whale and the crocodile, are known to be or some of the closest ancestors we have to the dinosaurs. If that is the case, this creates a period of time when there were species on the earth, birds and reptilian water animals, without humans and other animals. So if we look at these as periods and not so much as days, which we already have a problem with, in how the books have been set up here, or how they're being, the creation story is being told, there's already a slight problem in the division of day and night. So I think it's very important to notice these, and if we look at these as periods, they make a lot more sense. They make a lot more sense in the creation story. So let's pick up here at the end of the 5th day. With verse 24. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, the beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. I want to stop right here and point out that cattle are being separated from all other animals. And we talked about these early fertility cults and the bull And this makes sense that cattle would be separated, because if people are worshiping cattle, as we know that they were from the Bible, because when Moses came down off of the mount after getting the Ten Commandments, he got angry with people because they were worshiping cattle. This is kind of one of those ideas when Moses comes down the mountain and he smashes the objects, the golden calf that they're worshiping. He is stomping out these early traditional ideas on religion. Moses is stomping out this polytheistic idea of worshiping other animals and worshiping multiple gods. So it's very important to recognize that this cattle is separate from all the other creeping animals on the earth, which are not mentioned by name, which leads scholars to believe that cattle are important. And as we know from other religions, cattle are worshipped in many religions. This leads us back to that original idea of fertility, um, and cattle worship. And it makes sense that this would be mentioned separately. Okay. Um, so at verse 26, let's pick up there. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Wait, hold on a minute. That's not the story I was told in Sunday school. I was told that Adam was created by God, who breathed breath into his nostrils, and then from him, from his rib, Eve was created. What is this creation here at verse 27? Ah, that's a very good question, huh? Um, if you remember, I talked about these doublets, and we're about to see how these doublets pose problems for the translation of the Bible. Okay? This first story, where we see male and female created at the same time and equally, provides a whole new perspective on the way that we look at these ancient early Christians, as opposed to what we're about to read. So let's pick up with verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all this earth, and every tree in which the fruit of tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast on the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to every living thing that creepeth upon the earth, wherein is live, I have given it to it every green herb for meat. And it was so. So God specifically tells us here we're supposed to be eating plants, and so are the animals. We're all supposed to be eating these plants with the seeds. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Okay, so that is our first creation story. That is the most complete creation story that we see in the Bible. Remember, with the Bible, these verses and chapters did not come in till much later, which is why we're going to see the end of this story over in chapter 2. So let's move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all that host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all of his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all of his work which God created and made. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made in the earth and the heavens. Period. Verse 4. That's the end of the first book. Now we're going to see something different happen. Here at verse 5, we start to see another story come into play. Okay? At verse 5 we see, And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. Wait a minute. What just happened here? We just went backwards. There's no plants on the earth. God had not made it rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. Wait, wait, wait. I just saw them created over here in chapter 1, verse 27. So why at verse 5 are we saying again that there is nothing here? These are two stories combined together to make it look like one. Okay? But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. This is at verse 6. And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put a man whom he had formed. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight, and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Boom, there those are. That's where they come in chapter 2. They were never originally mentioned in the creation story in chapter 1. They come in chapter 2. As we continue with verse 10, and a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted, and became into 4 heads. The name of the first is Pison. That is it which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. There is Bedlam, and the onyx stone, and the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel. That is it which goeth toward the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. Now, we should know exactly where the garden is from the placement of these rivers. The third river, the Hiddekel, is sometimes referred to as the Tigris, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. So depending on which version of the Bible you're reading, depends on which version of the rivers you get, or is this a name change? I'm not sure. But we should know exactly where the garden was. Because of the river placement, and this geology is important. The Apocrypha that is left out of the Bible is several books of geography on these early areas. These ideas are important in understanding the Bible, so why are they being left out? Let's pick up again at verse 15. And the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. Okay, so man was created to till the garden, is what we're saying here. And with every myth that we've read, every story that we've read, humans are created to do work for the gods, because the gods can't do all the work or don't want to do all the work. So keep that in mind. This story is traditionally following the mythological storyline. At verse 16 we see, And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge and good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatst thereof thou shalt surely die. And the Lord God said, It is not good that the man should be alone. Okay, wait, hold on. So at verse 17, we see God telling Adam that he should not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Thou shalt not eat of it. Okay? He tells Adam that. But what we don't see here, or what we don't talk about here, is that Eve hasn't even been created yet. If we're going by this story, Eve hasn't been created when God tells Adam not to eat that eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. She's not even alive yet. And the Lord God said, at verse 18, It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an help meet for him. Okay? And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field. Okay, wait. He didn't make Eve first. He didn't make her as a companion. He made the animals of every fowl of the air, and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature was the name thereof. Okay, there's something about naming things too that we need to keep in mind. Naming things gives us dominion over them. It defines them. So when we see Adam getting to name everything, that gives Adam dominion over all of the things that he named. names. And Adam gave names to all the cattle, to all the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found an help meet for him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. Okay, that's kind of different, right? So at verse 21, we see God causing Adam to fall into a deep sleep, which sounds an awful lot like surgery. And as he slept, he takes one of his ribs, he stitches him back up, and then he takes that rib, which the Lord God had taken from man, and he made a woman, and he brought her into the man. Okay, so at verse 22, we see the woman created. Okay, she's not created over here at verse 17 when God's telling Adam not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He's not over there. God has performed surgery here. This is an unusual way to talk about things during this period, to describe almost a medical procedure, in the 8th, 6th, 10th century BCE, or even later, whenever these books are being written. And then to form something from another body part is something that we're doing right now. We are growing other body parts from pieces of someone else's body part. We can grow new livers and kidneys and spleens and ears and skin. We can grow all of these things now. So this is this leads me to believe that there is a much more higher civilized culture that precedes this age of man. Okay. This idea that the gods caused him to fall into a sleep and create another being is very alien. It sounds like alien invaders, and by definition, God is an alien, being that he is not a terrestrial being. He is not of this earth. So it's interesting when you hear some of these theories about aliens helping in the creation and setup of some of these early civilizations. It is very interesting to read this in the Bible, in the King James Bible. So let's move on to verse 23. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall he cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed." Okay, so this is the end of book 2. This is a very interesting book because of that. If it didn't exist, if book 2 didn't exist, which we don't really need book 2 to create for our creation mythology at all. We've already done everything that is set aside in book 2. We've already created all of these beings. What chapter 2 does is chapter 2 allows us to get a broader picture of Adam and Eve that paints Adam as a subservient, or that paints Eve as subservient to Adam because of the naming issue and coming from Adam's rib. Why is this important? Why is this story more important than the other story that we saw in chapter 1? And is this where we see breakdowns among sects of Christianity, where some sects believe this chapter 2 creation, putting male as the head, and some sects believe this chapter 1 creation of male and female equality? Well, we're not sure, but we do know what this does is gives leeway for early Jewish translators to practice midrash. And midrash is the practice of finely combing ancient texts to see if you can connect the dots between characters that may not have a name, like this woman in the female created in book 1 and the female created in book 2. So under this midrash period, they create stories. These Jewish Masoretic Jews that are translating the Bible try to connect stories. So they create their own stories. They fill in the gaps in ways and create this woman called Lilith, who is demonized for not sleeping with Adam. And this comes from an ancient text called the Ben Sira. And another text, I believe was it a coffin text? But this Lilith character is mentioned in both of these texts as not submitting to Adam, and she called upon God, and God tried to make her go back, and she denied that, and was taken away. And um, from that connection, then further demonizing of Lilith comes into play, and we see Lilith become a vampire, a creature of the night that comes and steals your babies. So watch the Lilith video as well. And this will give you a little more idea of what's going on with Genesis 1 and 2. And remember, when reading this, that we're told two very different stories in these first two chapters of the Bible. And these are not necessarily the stories that we grew up with, or the stories. This is not the complete version of the story that we have in our head that we were taught in Sunday school or by our grandparents. A lot of this is added and add to the evolution of Christianity and the evolution of the Bible. By adding in the second book, we are evolving the Bible, or this first story, into something totally different. And without the second story, would men and women be considered equal, or have been considered equal in the church? This is something very important because, as we know, females are not and have not always been considered equal within the church, the Christian church. The Catholic Church itself has done everything they can to prevent females from holding leadership roles within the church. So maybe we need to look at some of these problems when we're looking at how the Bible was put together, how the Bible was actually combined, and what story we're trying to tell by combining these books together. That first book alone would have been plenty, but instead we went back and added a second book that does something very different, and it controls women. So I want you to think about that when we're talking about these biblical creation stories. I hope this helps with the reading that you had on Genesis 1 and 2.